Welcome to the TD K-12 podcast. I'm here to help you navigate the exciting world of living overseas, being an expat, international teaching, and more. I was an expat living and working overseas from 2002 until 2019. After relocating, I decided I wanted to share information I had for those people who might be looking to go overseas and those people who are already overseas and looking to make a move. So join me for this podcast, and if you want to watch on YouTube, the podcast is on YouTube with some visuals. There are links both in the podcast show notes and on YouTube. Please subscribe and hit the like button if you like this. Let's get started. In this episode, we're going to review the materials and documents you need to move forward with your recruitment process. The previous episode, we talked about tools and technology and things to avoid. Please make sure that you review all this. It's important. One thing that you need to keep in mind is that you have a limited amount of time to work on recruitment. The more organized you are and the faster you can make things and edit things, the better off you're going to be. This particular episode will not be very long. I'm going to cover the highlights. There will be a point when we start talking about dealing with contacting schools and negotiating where we might get into more detail on a few of these. But this should be enough to get you started. And because it's very time consuming, it's best that you get started well before you want to apply. First, the most common thing everybody knows to do is create a resume or a CV. I have said a few times now that you need more than one. So if you're going to be applying for a job as a science teacher in a high school, and it's an American high school, running an AP curriculum, you need a resume that speaks to that. If you're going to be going to a boarding school, you need a resume that speaks to your work in pastoral care, in counseling students, and leading advisory, things like that. If you're interested in getting into an administrative position, maybe transitioning from teaching, you need to really have a resume that highlights any time that you've led a team, developed a project plan and seen the project through, etc. You definitely need multiple resumes for different types of jobs. I've made resumes before that are 4 and 5 pages long, and I make those resumes not to hand out, but to get everything down. And then from that very long resume, I distill it into smaller ones. I have a short version of my resume. The short version is 1 page. It's everything you would need to know my years of experience and my core qualifications. The most important thing about resumes and CVs is to have a flexible set of documents. Make sure that you can customize them quickly and make sure that at first glance when you look at them, they really highlight who you are and what you can do. There are resume consultants out there. I am not a resume consultant, but I do know some. If you want a reference, send me an email and I'll get you connected. Cover letters. Cover letters are essentially the most important document that you have. In the cover letter, the most important thing that you need to say, why you want to work at that school. That's it. And you need to get that out within the first 2 paragraphs. I'm not going to give you advice on how to write cover letters. There are tons of samples out there. You want to write to the job, obviously, and your strengths. But number 1, you need to tell the school why you want to work at that school. Make it succinct, make it very clear, and be able to support it if you're interviewed. Cover letters are the key to the employer understanding who you are and your personality. Your resume is just a list of things they can kind of reference to see what you've done. But there are plenty of people in jobs who were hired because of who they were and not what they had done previously. And I have been in trainings with 30 to 40 senior administrators, and heads of schools. This comes up all the time. The most important thing: why do you want to work at my school? Why do you want to work at that school? Make certain that's at the top and it's clear. Usually your first paragraph needs to be a quick introduction. That's fine. Second paragraph, answer that question. The next thing I want to tell you about cover letters: be upfront about your spouse and your children if they're coming with you. Okay, so for example, let's say that you found an amazing job and your spouse doesn't really need to work. Even though they might be certified to work and maybe there's a job open for them, be very clear if they're not seeking employment or if it's not required. For example, I'm applying for a job in educational technology. My wife is a librarian. However, if there isn't a library position open, that's fine. If you have children and they're going to need to be enrolled in the school you're applying to, you should state that you have children and state their ages and their grade levels they will be going into if you were to get the job. You don't have to ask if they get free tuition. Just make sure you're clear. I have 2 children. One is 7 and one is 8. And then state what grade they will be going into next year. If you're looking at applying for a school that is a different curriculum system than the one you're in, do a little research and figure out what that next grade level is. Don't say they're going into grade 5 if the school doesn't have grade 5. They may have something else. If the school uses terms like year instead of grade, like year 6 instead of grade 6, you want to use year and not grade. All of this is important. They need to feel comfortable and they need to feel like you've done your research and that you actually want to work there. Certificates and criminal record checks. Most people are aware that they need to have their professional certificates and diplomas ready for applying for jobs. And some people seem to understand the criminal record check process, but it seems like a lot of people don't understand what they need to do to have certificates that will be accepted, diplomas that will be accepted, and criminal record checks that will be accepted. There's a difference in having the document and the document being validated and acceptable. So I'm actually going to start with the criminal record checks. Criminal record checks have gotten a lot more strenuous. Here is the basic rule. You need a criminal record check for every country you've lived in for the last 10 years. If you have not gotten a criminal record check and you had left the country and you've already left the country, you need to find a way to get it. Do everything in your power to try to get the criminal record check. It's usually possible through a consulate or an embassy, but you need to try. If you can't, you can't. But you definitely need to do your due diligence. Let's say you've left the country and there's no way to get the criminal record check after you leave. This is what you need to do. You need to contact your previous employer and you need to ask them for a letter that states that while you were working at the school, to their knowledge, you committed no crimes and always demonstrated proper and good behavior, etc. There are plenty of these templates online that you can use, and I'll find one and link it in the show notes. But you want the HR department basically to say that you didn't get in trouble while you were working at the school. That's not as good, but you definitely need something like that. It must bear the official school stamp. You need it mailed to you. Don't ask for this electronically. Ask them to write it. You could send them the document. Have them print it, sign it, stamp it, and mail it. It's very important that it has the school's seal on the document. Certificates and diplomas. You need certified copies. You don't really want to travel around with the official ones. Sometimes it's difficult to get certified copies depending on where you're living, and you have to use the actual diploma or certificate that you were issued. Here's the normal process. You need to, in your home country, find a notary that will notarize the diploma and or the certificates. For example, in my home state, I had to go to a county level notary to get the documents notarized. Then I had to send a copy of it from the notarization information with the notarized copies to the state, and the state notarized them as well. So then when they went to an embassy or consulate, they would accept them. There's usually multiple levels of notarization. Every country is different, and even every state in America and every province in Canada are different. So you need to look into this. You need to have all of the stuff notarized, and you need copies, because what's going to happen is eventually you're going to hit an application that requires you to get your documents attested or documents apostilled. Both of these processes are slightly different, but basically what happens is your documents go through multiple processing agencies to get validated. And it's different. Both processes are different. I'm not going to go through them specifically right now. They are time consuming and they are expensive. I would say you need to set aside for paperwork processing around $1,000 for all your paperwork processing. If you're required to mail your passport and original diplomas, etc., you want to use the best shipping and receiving process you can use. You want everything overnight. You want signatures. You want multiple levels of accountability for this stuff. Don't go cheap. A lot of schools will let you reimburse this. Save all the receipts. Save all the envelopes that things come back in. Don't throw a single document away, even if it's just a stamp. Keep it all until you're at the new job with a visa in your passport and you've received your reimbursements. Throw absolutely nothing away. My general rule, I don't throw anything away related to visas, attestation, apostilles, notarization. I don't throw anything away for 3 to 5 years. After everything is done, scan them all. Scan them and store them in the cloud somewhere. When you're applying for jobs, a lot of times you can upload all your certificates, diplomas, and criminal record checks if they're notarized, just notarized. They're not apostilled yet. They haven't gone through any kind of crazy process. They haven't been shipped to an embassy or consulate. You can upload them for the application. Some other materials I didn't list that come up in different phases. You might need letters of reference. Not references, but letters of reference. So most of these recruitment agencies have a reference system. You put in names, email addresses, etc. The person receives a survey about you. Others might also allow you to attach an open letter of reference. Those are very helpful as long as they're timely. I would say they need to be within the last year before you apply. You also shouldn't ask anyone to do it unless they've known you for at least 2 years. An open letter of reference needs to be typed up, printed, and signed. It shouldn't be all electronic and digital. It needs to be signed and dated. Then you scan that into your cloud and you keep that. And you can use it whenever you need it. You always want to let the person know that you're going to be using the open letter of reference in case they're contacted. So if you decide that you're going to use an open letter of reference from Dr. Tom Smith, submit the letter, and then email Dr. Tom Smith and let him know and tell him who you sent it to and what job it was for. I found it very useful to have a current letter of teaching philosophy or educational philosophy. There are quite a few people who will follow up with you if they're interested and they'll want that document. Just write it out, update it every 2 or 3 years. There's tons of samples online. I'll find some and link them in the show notes. You want it to be somewhere from like 2 to 4 paragraphs, succinct. You want to tell them, what you're passionate about in terms of education or in terms of teaching. Photos. You need photos of yourself. I would just initially start with a set of good passport photos, and I would get someone to take some good headshots as well. So some US passport photos, Canadian, whatever your passport is, get photos that size to start with. Make sure that they're professional, meaning go somewhere, dress nice, have the photos taken. It's inexpensive. They're very useful. A lot of applications require photos to be a certain size. You can resize them. If they're good quality, they're much easier to resize. You probably are going to have to use photos anyway to apply for visas. So when you get your photos done, you can ask for a variety of sizes. There's like 4 or 5 different types of passport sizes around the world and visa sizes. So I'll link that in the show notes. Just tell them that you want a set, get them done, have them. They'll normally give them to you printed out, and they'll also give you them digitally. When you're applying, you should get a sense of what kind of pictures they want, but actually, a lot of application services give you the quote unquote option to attach a photo. It is not an option. You are less likely to get contacted if you don't have a photo. If you want to get contacted, upload a photo. Some services are now allowing video. I don't know. I don't know how important that is. Get a feel for the school. If you're looking at schools that seem to have a huge social media presence, are doing things in the community a lot, are just very extroverted, you probably want to consider doing a video. But a lot of schools are very traditional. People aren't going to watch the videos. I'm certain that some people simply don't feel like they have time to watch the videos. Research materials. For every single job you're interested in, you need to have a set of research materials so that you know about the school and you're prepared to answer questions they may ask on the application. Some schools have customized questions, and those questions are relating to some kind of scenario, and you want to answer them from the perspective of the school. You can go back and start researching while you're answering, but you're not going to have the same speed. You're going to waste a lot of time, and you're also more likely to make mistakes because you haven't curated the materials. So obviously start with the school's website, look up their social media, see what their students are doing, what their teachers are doing, get to know the school, make notes, save it in a document. Remember, every school needs to have a folder, and in that folder, everything about the school needs to be in there. Social media. You need to have 2 social media presences. One that's professional and one that's private. The easiest thing to do, if you haven't already, you want to go into your social media, especially if you're using something like Facebook, Pinterest, or Instagram, and you want to take your current account, if you just have one, and go through the security settings and really tighten it up so that nobody can open search you. You do not want any employers to stumble on you on social media if it's your personal, uncurated content. Your next option for having professional social media is either to make a new account, which might require you to get another email address and or phone number, or to use a social media platform professionally that you don't use personally, which I think is the easiest and best way to do it. Just build your professional social media out on LinkedIn plus one other thing. So for example, for professional stuff, I use LinkedIn plus Twitter. Private stuff, maybe I use Facebook. That's how I would recommend you doing it. Make your choice however you want to do it. I would use 2 platforms, both that are slightly different and complement each other for professional stuff, and make sure I'm not crossing it over with the private. That's the end of this episode. I hope you liked the content. If you did, hit the like or subscribe button, and we'll be back next week with more TD K-12 content.